Good morning. It is amazing to see all of you. I'm so excited. I really thought people say they'll come to a 7:30 event, but how many really want to get up and come to where they said they'd go, especially some who have to start. I have a friend here from way out in Virginia. Debbie started at 5 o'clock to get here. Thank you. A number of you have come from far places. This was uncomfortable. Would anyone who was there last night at our dinner with Rush Limbaugh please stand up? Stand up. Oh my gosh. Woo! Give yourself a hand. Really, that is fabulous. This shows your commitment. So good morning. My name is Ginny Thomas. I'm the Associate Vice President for Washington Operations for Hillsdale College. I used to work here in this building with a number of my friends who are here, Matt and Bridget and others from Heritage, for about 10 years. So this is a new transition for me. With me today are my colleagues in the D.C. office of Hillsdale College, David Bobb, who is our director of the Center of Constitutional Studies and Citizenship. David, stand up. Where's David? David. We have Jennifer Powell. Jennifer Powell is our office manager. Please stand up. She came all the way from Dallas to join us to make our office run smoothly. We love that. We have Jeff Brewer. Please stand up, a Hillsdale grad. Jeff is a research associate, and Joe Sella is a consultant with us. Joe, please stand up. Joe does a lot of our media work, and he's doing a great job. We're getting more press and more people all the time, so we've got a good momentum started. On behalf of Hillsdale College's Alan P. Kirby, Jr., Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship, we welcome you to the first monthly gathering of like-minded patriots who realize the urgent need to gather, to teach, to renew first principles in constitutional limited government. This is an effort to build a community, to find a friend, bring more people together. Every month, the first Friday, we've moved a few, you'll notice on the flyer, for holidays. We're moving until we get our building up and operational across the street, 227 Massachusetts Avenue, Northeast. For those who want to take a tour, I think David, you should find David afterwards, because he's going to take some people over to see the building if you want to see it. But it won't be open until September 2010. So until then, we're going to be moving around the city in different locations. This time, Heritage has allowed us to come here. Next time, it's the Metropolitan Club because of a friend to my right. And then in February, we're going to the Supreme Court because of a friend in my life. And, and we'll be moving around the city. You'll have to keep up with us, but I think it'll be fun, and we'll find some new friends each time we move around to different places. We urge you to build this into your monthly schedule. Bring a friend, as I said. Meet new friends before you leave. Just like there's groups in town who are meeting and working together and finding fellowship over issues, whether it's the Prosperity Caucus or some of the other groups in town. This is an idea of finding people who believe, as Matt Spalding does, that it's time to focus on first principles and limited government and find our community and get better and better together. The Washington office of Hillsdale College will eventually be across the street, but we have already launched at least 4 Washington activities that let me mention before I introduce Tripp Howell to my right. Last night, we filled the rafters of the Mayflower Hotel with the annual Churchill dinner featuring Rush Limbaugh, and it was a great time. All of you who were there know it was a great time. If you weren't there, I encourage you to listen to Rush's show today at 12 o'clock. I have a hunch that he might play a few things from that presentation last night. So Hillsdale's about to get a few more visitors to the website, I suspect. We also have the Washington Hillsdale Internship Program and the George Washington Fellows Program. If you're a Hillsdale intern or a fellow, would you please stand up? I think we have them visiting today. Thank you. A former intern, too, stood up. Okay. And we also have the new Madison Fellows training program that's developing for next week. We launch with the Federalist Society, who some of our friends are here from there, as well as Heritage Foundation. Matt and Mike Frank are helping us. And the three organizations, Hillsdale, Heritage, and the Federalist Society, have joined hands, and together we're going to start with teaching very senior Senate and House staff on why principles matter in politics, how to read the Constitution, what went wrong with the administrative state, and why we've got a government out of control. Larry will come back next week from Michigan, thank you very much, and be the first speaker at lunch next week, next Tuesday, and Ed Meese will be the speaker on Wednesday afternoon to finish that session off. And we'll have probably 4 sessions for these Madison Fellows. They're getting resources. It's a great program, and it's a great partnership with the Federalist Society and Heritage that Hillsdale is doing. We also serve Hillsdale alums who are in the area. If you're a Hillsdale alum, you kind of have to stand up too. If you're an alum, could you please stand up? I'm sorry. It keeps people awake in the morning. Good. And they're helping us bring friends to these monthly events. So we have a small army. We're working, and now you're awake. Isn't that good? We look forward to opportunities to recruit excellent high school students who are coming through Washington who may be interested in the finest liberal arts college in our nation that's only 2 hours outside of Detroit, Michigan, that they might not otherwise get to, but they'll get to Washington. So we're going to have an opportunity to talk to them. So without further ado, let me introduce Trip Howell, whose idea this was, to have monthly First Friday lectures where we start talking to the community around Washington about great ideas. Trip Howell, it was a Hillsdale alum also. He started out as a political director for a Republican senator from Iowa, actually. And I have gotten to know him and have enjoyed him. He's helped Hillsdale find the building that we're going to be in across the street. He serves as the international director of Jones Lang LaSalle's Mid-Atlantic Brokerage Group. During his 23-year commercial real estate career, Mr. Howell has successfully represented building owners and tenants, and he's quite successful in his own right, moving from politics to the real business community. Trip?
Thanks, Penny. Thank you very much. It's neat being a Hillsdale grad standing up here and inaugurating this program. But let me give a quick history. I came to Washington 30 years ago, actually in January of 1979, as a Heritage Foundation intern under the WHIP program, the Washington Hillsdale Internship Program. And at that time, the Heritage Foundation was occupying a small former veterinary clinic over on Stanton Square, and they had 12 employees. Can you imagine Hillsdale College 30 years from now in Washington? Larry?
The answer is yes.
Yeah. I think we'll have about 2,000 employees. It's really neat seeing this come together, and I'm pleased after events like last night, and having had deep set roots at Hillsdale, growing up in Detroit, leaving in 1980, the last time we bailed out an automobile industry, and coming to Washington was really great what the Foundation Hillsdale gave me. But seeing last night's event, 650 people at the Mayflower Hotel, listening to Rush and listening to Dr. Arnn, really position us in what we have ahead of us was really fantastic. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Arnn. Before becoming president of Hillsdale 8 years ago, he served as president of the Claremont Institute from 1985 till 2000. He was also founding chairman of the California Civil Rights Initiative, which prohibited racial preferences in state hiring, contracting, and college admissions. Dr. Arnn received his BA from Arkansas State University and his MA and PhD in government from the Claremont Graduate School. He worked in England as a research assistant for Sir Martin Gilbert, the official biographer of Sir Winston Churchill. It was there that Dr. Arnn met his wife Penny. They have 4 children, Katie, Henry, Alice, and Tony. Most of them, I think, living in Hillsdale, right? Now, one in California, Hillsdale. Dr. Arnn is doing a fantastic job heading up our college's fundraising drive, the Founders Campaign, which to date has raised over $440 million for endowed scholarships, faculty chairs, and building and renovation projects. And if you haven't been to the campus, I've had occasion to be back there the last 2 falls. It is just truly a special place, and the presence that it has from the new buildings on campus are fantastic, and now a building here in Washington. Under his leadership, long-running college programs continue to enjoy much success, including the National Leadership Seminars, the Center for Constructive Alternatives, the Von Mises Lecture Series in Free Market Economics, and the monthly Speech Digest Imprimis, which now reaches 1.7 million readers each month. And with Dr. Arnn at the helm, Hillsdale College remains true to its historic mission and operates entirely free of any federal or state taxpayer support. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Larry Arnn discussing the crisis of American constitutionalism. Just one comment I want to make. We're recording this morning's event, and we're going to have, as will be the form of this program, questions and answers in the later portion of it. If you could grab the microphone that will be handed to you or directed to you for your questions, we want to make sure we get those on tape. With that, Dr. Arnn.
Thank you, Tripp, and thank you, Jenny. We did have a good night last night. Thank you all for being there. And I'm really glad to see the students here this morning because, as you know, college students are basically vampires by habit. Something dragged them up this morning. I don't know what it was. I have just 2 points. The first is, how do we know we're in a constitutional crisis? And the second is, what should we do about it? I was reading lately Reagan's Time for Choosing speech from 1964. I actually knew the man who organized for him to give that speech, Henry Salvatore, who's a friend of the Heritage Foundation and Hillsdale College and the Claremont Institute, and was a friend of mine for 30 years. He said in that speech, in a mocking way 3 times, that they keep saying they're going to bring the full power of the national government to bear upon this problem and that. Agriculture was the one he talked about the most. And he made the point that there isn't any constitutional power to do those things. And that was a wonderful, it was a radical and crazy thing to do. And it had amazing effects for Reagan's life and for the politics of the country. And the amazing thing is that the minute Ronald Reagan retired, the momentum went entirely out of that side of his politics. Soon enough, the end of the Cold War came, and the big debate was the peace dividend. And politicians started doing what Reagan did not. They took polls and they asked people what they were worried about. And our constitutional system works in a certain way. It is a purely representative form of government. They take pride in that fact. In the Federalist, the first purely representative form of government ever built. And that means on a normal day, ordinary people don't have very much to do in regard to the government. And that, by the way, is the reason why opinion polls change a lot as elections near. If you ask somebody what the big issue is on their lives in April, they will likely tell you that they've got to remember to pick up their dry cleaning. And if you ask them in October 15th, the answers are a lot better. And that's because they have the habit in them of participating as the Constitution calls upon them to do. But if you live in a world where anything is possible, you can get Al Gore running for the presidency on lost luggage at airports and traffic jams in suburbs, which was, by the way, key cornerstones of his first out-of-the-box set of things he was running for president against George Bush in 2004. And the reason is he asked, and they told him. Those are fleeting things, but more persistent things since the peace dividend days came and the Cold War was over have been, the first really great one was education. the first George Bush ran that he wanted to be the education president, which led my teacher, several of our teachers, several of us here, to our students of the man, Harry Jaffa, to comment that education is not an adjective. And his son, the first time I ever heard him give a speech was in California, and he said like 15 times that he was busy teaching every child in Texas to read, and he knew that Dan Lundgren, whom he was there support for governor of California, was going to teach every child in California to read. And a friend of mine, after it was over, said, "What'd you think?" And I said, "Well, you know, have you ever taught a child to read? Because I haven't, and I never shall. I mean, unless I do something like that when I retire. Because at Hillsdale, they can read." And our own children learned to read in kindergarten. We read to them. The point is, George Bush is not a school teacher. And he talks as if he is. Now, it is a proper function of state government to be in charge of the teaching of children to read. But you would talk about that as if you were a politician, I think. A governor elected to a constitutional office. And his idea about education has been the same since the first days. It was the idea in Texas. Margaret Spellings, the current Secretary of Education, has been his education advisor from the first days. She came with him from Texas. And his idea is top-down testing. The No Child Left Behind Act is the example of that, and there has been an attempt in the last years with some success to apply that to colleges. And the idea, by the way, in principle, is not necessarily a bad idea. And there are models of it everywhere. First of all, Margaret Thatcher was education minister in her first education job in England, and what she did was top-down testing there. In Oxford University, the way they examine is they have, it's a really great system and almost nerve-wracking. There are 4 possible degrees, and one of them is a failing degree, so it's not a degree, I guess. But you get your whole grades, and you get your degree cited by a series of examinations you take at the end of 3 years at Oxford. And those are graded anonymously and not by your professors who have taught you along the way. And so, and by the way, at Hillsdale College, we are working on curriculum reforms right now that may well have some element of that institution in them. And it's a good idea, right? But the question is it a good idea for the federal government to do that? And that's where you reach the question of a constitutional crisis. And 2 things come up. The first of all is, if the federal government imposed national, as it is doing, national testing across the country, what would it be like? It will be, the test will be written by the established academics. And those are the people who have given us this thing that I mentioned last night that Matt Spaulding wrote that fine essay about. That will give us the Capitol Visitor Center. And that account of the Constitution, and what is the specific point of that thing? What is at the heart of that thing? I mean, it is a painful embarrassment that God was actually erased and yet is still visible. But also, the end, education, a lot is made of that there. But the ends of education are altered. So not religion, morality, and knowledge, which are, by the way, all 3 things that are outside us and not subject to our will. And education, which comes from the Latin word for lead forth, what it means is to address oneself to that. I can tell you, there's a bunch of Hillsdale College students here, and they will tell you, I can tell you, on their behalf and with them, it's painful and hard to do that. It's painful and hard to raise yourself to a place where you look up and see accurately high things. You have to give yourself to it. You have to forget yourself to do it. It is precisely not an exercise of the will, except in the effort and determination to do it. After that, the will must be surrendered. You must become one with the thing you are attempting to observe. But of course, it is the characteristic phenomenon of the modern academy that power is the replacement of knowledge. Go and read the founding document of the American Association of University Professors written by John Dewey. 1915. It's called the General Report. You can find it on the internet. And you will see, if you read it with care, by the way, it is written the way John Dewey writes, which means it's almost unreadable. I myself would never have read it, except once John Sober criticized me for being against it in the Claremont Review of Books. And the minute I read the criticism, I thought, God help me, I'm going to have to read that document. And I did read it, and what it means is a new purpose of the university is born, which is to manage the social evolution of the society. An exercise in power, you see. And what is to guide it except academics coming up with plans, which is the opposite phenomenon from the beholding of the high ends that are the purpose that are written in the nature of the human being. So the first problem is, if you make a uniformity in education today, you will make that one. And it is an exercise in despotism. But the second problem is, you can't do that through the federal government without violating the spirit, for sure, but also the letter of the Constitution. And that means, by the way, you cut it off from law. And if there's no law, then what will rule? Will. Those are the two alternatives. I'm going to say a little word about this in the end because there's a work for us to do, a project for us all to undertake, something for us to work on. But I will just comment right now that the first great piece of legislation regarding education is the third of our 4 organic laws in our history. And it is the kind of legislation that was characteristic of American history for its first 150 years. And that is, of course, the Northwest Ordinance and its accompanying land ordinances. There were 2, I think, especially the one of 1785. And what those do is they provide a government asset, land, as a bequest for the support of education in each township, and the federal government's involvement ends with that. It is a magnificent gift. It's an awesome thing. It has reverberated through American history that that gift was given, and we can never give such a big gift again. We don't have the resources to do it. By the time it got to California, it was 4/36 of the western land. I guess that would be 1/8 probably. And you can see what I studied. and that, you see what that was? That's a general law. You can read it quickly. It has massive implications, and there are almost no details. A pattern. We should all accustom ourselves to the extent that we work on policy in the effort of writing such things. We should try to reduce complication. When we wrote the California Civil Rights Initiative, Arnn Steinberg, who was here last night, headed up the effort to do it, and a whole bunch of lawyers. God help us, there were a bunch of really good lawyers, Charles Freed and people like that. They helped write it, and it took 6 months. And the reason is our criteria was we had to be able to put it on the back of our business card, all of it. And it had to be comprehensible to the ordinary eye and understanding. And by the way, if you make laws like that, you can't make very many. And they will be limited in their effect, although, by the way, grand in their meaning. And today, if you accept Title IV of the Higher Education Act, which is the thing we do not accept, well, we don't accept any of the titles, but that's the one that's hard not to accept because it will increase your revenues by about 1/3 if you take the money. 1/3 is a lot right now with the economy in a mess. We'd like to have that money. But what do you have to do? The answer is it's hard to say what you have to do because the rules are contained in 375 pages that cannot be read. I tell this story too much, but I'll tell it again. I was new at Hillsdale College, and I called up our lawyer. We have a lobbyist here in town. Mr. Pee Wee back there talks to him once in a while. We pay him money, probably 25 or 30 grand lately, but it'll probably be more soon, to keep the government away from us. And I sent him a note, and I said, send me Title IV. I'm going to read it. And he called me up and said, no, you're no use doing that. You won't be able to read it. And I said, that's because I was a lawyer, right? And I'm thinking, I'm a pretty smart fella. I told him that. And he said, yeah, I can't read it either. We keep a specialist here to read it. That's all she knows. The staff of the Department of Education often calls her. She has given her life, by the way. And that is a governing instrument. By the way, it's just been expanded a whole bunch last fall. And I don't know what's in it. Ginny wants us to join some outfit here in Washington because she thinks they know what's in it. By the way, how would you know? No one knows what's in it, right? You can't know what's in it. Did you ever read Hegel? But there's a meaning in Hegel, I imagine. We're not drifting anymore. We're moving somewhere now. And it has its hard side, and we should remark what the hard side is. It means that rich people can lobby government to take the property from other people for their private inurement. That happens now. That is an offense against the nature of the human being, and it is common. It means that businesses can be taken over, increasingly now, quite soon, by unions that will soon enough not have to have secret ballots, and will change the nature of companies if they take them over. It means that speech rights are now allocated. If you read the works of Cass Sunstein, a modern academic at the University of Chicago, a very intelligent man, a nice man too, a good man, what he says is it's not equal if rich people can talk more loudly than poor people, and so the government must allocate the right to speak. And it does. The most regulated of industries, that's a big order, so I'll say as regulated as any I know, is the election industry. And think what that means, you see. Because I said before, this is the first purely representative form of government. And that means something odd, and you have to think for just a second to know what it is. Sovereignty means the legitimate title to rule, and in all governments before ours, whoever held sovereignty was part of the government. And so the king was the executive branch in England, for example, until Parliament. And by the way, that's the reason why the two branches are together in England. It wasn't designed that way. The king picked key people in Parliament to be his ministers, and they helped him manage the Parliament. But of course, as the Parliament got stronger and the king got weaker, the executive branch was just dragged into the Parliament. In Athens, the people would meet and vote as a legislature. You see, all at once. We don't have that here. What we have is a constitutional majority that has but one way to control the government, and that is through elections. And if it is true that there is now a party of the government, very large and connected in our country, and the government regulates elections tightly, down to who gives and what may be said at what time, with a plain, obvious, often commented upon purpose to pick winners and losers, as was powerfully effected in the recent election, then, of course, there is a danger that sovereignty will pass into the government. And that at a time when the whole idea of rights is corrupted to mean things that it has never meant before. This word nature means two things. It means, it comes from the Latin word for birth, and so of course it means the process of begetting and growth by which any living thing comes to be, which has implications for the family. I work in the college business, and they have a nature when they're 19. They're young. They can do anything, but they never did before. So everything is new for them. It's a wonder to watch it, by the way, because the combination of capacity and promise and inexperience is delightful. That's on their side, right? That's what they're like. But you should be a college president for a little while sometime and call somebody's home and announce your name. This is Larry Arnn calling. And mom or dad says, oh my gosh, why do they do that? Right? The kid's 19. If they were cheetahs or monkeys, the parent would not know who they are anymore. Not for long since. You see? Because the act of charity between parent and child, it taking so long to raise human beings, is fundamental to human society, and we are on a course willfully to discard that right now. And that brings up the second thing that word nature means, which means the thing itself, whatever it is that makes it what it is. And if you lose sight of the human being and you regard it as an evolutionary thing, something changing, the process of change controllable by human hands, then of course, in principle, you may do anything with it. And the constitutional structures are coming into place whereby you can do that. And so my last point is just the work we should do. We should form a party of the Constitution and of the Declaration of Independence. It should be our explicit text. There is precedent for this in 1787, in 1800, in 1860. Think what happened in 1860, because of course we at Hillsdale participated in that. For about 40 years, nobody had known what to do about the slavery issue. They had compromised it and put it off. The country gradually divided into a party of the Declaration of Independence, which did not like slavery, and did not like the Constitution, which had the protections of slavery in it. And the party of the Constitution, which liked the protections of slavery. If I can take my pig into Nebraska, why can I not take my slave? Said Stephen Douglas. But the Declaration of Independence becomes a self-evident lie. And the interesting thing is that the solution to that problem, the political solution, the solution was ultimately military, but the political solution was found in this discovery, which involved close constitutional reading and an act of submission and humility to the Constitution. If it's true that the Constitution does not give us the power to eliminate slavery in South Carolina, then hate it though we hate it, we will not do that thing. Instead, we forbid it to grow, and that will mean it will be in a minority in the Union and placed in the course of ultimate extinction. And so those two documents were brought together again, and that was the powerful thing that left nothing but war as the way to those who would preserve the institution of slavery. It was a piece of constitutional reasoning alongside a piece of reasoning about the natural rights of the human being. I think the Declaration can be handy today because something's different now than was 60 years ago when Franklin Roosevelt did his wonders, 70 years ago or however long ago it was. People don't trust the government very much anymore. They know it's partial. They know it's a deal. They know it's ugly. They know I should probably try to get mine because I know it's going to cost me. If you spoke in the name of equality, if you said, why cut the taxes on 95% of the people by your lights? Why not do it on 51? And then expropriate 49? And then turn to the camera and say to people, but do you feel yourself powerful enough to make sure you're in the favored group? What if we got rid of groups? What if instead the rule was everybody would get treated precisely the same? What if we had, better than the Reagan tax cuts, which were magnificent, what if we had the flat tax? And what if we justified it in the name of equality and the proper operation of the Constitution? And what if we led with that, not because we posit that it will yield more revenue to the government, although that's a good enough thing, and not because we posit that it will help the economy, although that's a good enough thing. We will start with the fact that it is an act of justice. We should complain about bureaucracy a lot because people don't trust it. A good friend of mine who helped think up most of these arguments used to say when the Republicans, when the Congress changed hands in '94, he used to say they should hold hearings about the things that are done. Did not the Kelo thing from Connecticut echo across the country? But by the way, things are done like that every day. And they are done like that by people who can afford to hire $500 lawyers an hour. Is it more than that now? It probably is. You see? And people who can't afford that. In Michigan, by the way, it's a travesty. Just a year ago, the state was flat broke, so of course they raised taxes. No idea. And, you know, they actually did cut one government program. They let prisoners go. And the former treasurer of the state, I think his name is Clay, Tom Clay, I think. I heard him give a presentation, and he said, our incarceration rates are higher than our neighbors. And I said, what's our crime rate? He said he didn't know. But who did they raise taxes on? They did a services tax. And you can just look, you can go down the list of who's exempted from the services tax, and it's everybody who had a lobbyist in Lansing, Michigan. The dry cleaners were not exempted. The accountants and the lawyers were exempted. Why? You see, people see things like that. It is unjust, and a point can be made about it. And one should do that and not dedicate the building of the Department of Education after the maker of the Great Society. We should read the Homestead Act and think about that beautiful thing. We should remark that very large parts of the western lands of the United States are still in public hands, and most of them are in the Bureau of Land Management, and most of them are leased out to private parties to farm or to ranch or something. Why should we not give those to people on terms that if they will live on them and use them for 5 years, they can have them? That is one of the most generous pieces of legislation ever signed by any human hand. And it was signed at a time when in Russia, for example, you had to be a friend of the Tsar to own anything. And your ownership was only good so long as the Tsar liked the look of you. And here, to utter strangers, to anybody, we gave them a place to live if they would just do the American thing and live on it and work it. Why should we not do that? Right? Things like that. Why should we not think up bold things that we can justify specifically by the principles of the American Revolution and its constitutional practices and propose them and fight for them come hell or high water? And say out loud that we will lose on these things before we will abandon them. Because our freedom is wrapped up in them, and we will lose that if we abandon them. Because that is where we are. And the last thing to do is we have to become better students. Because most of us, including many of us, in the movement that holds the hope for the future of the country, don't know so much about the country as we used to know. Cannot accurately state how it was built and why. Cannot give an account of the nature of the human being, which is, of course, by the way, the account that is implicit and explicit in all the great works of the Western canon that gave rise to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And we get lost because we don't know those things. Because it's a changing, rapid world, and by the time we get in office, it's too late. And there is no repair for that except to amend how we live our lives. And if we want to live as free people, we must live as free people live, including what we do with our leisure, the proper understanding of which term we might well recover. And I think if we do all those things, beginning with a few of us and extending to more and more and then ultimately many, then I think we will save our freedom. And I think if we don't do those things, then it is lost. And thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if I can phrase this properly, but when you talk about the wonder of Ronald Reagan, conservatism and his ideas, and then you go back to things that are creeping socialist things, even he didn't discuss the advent of Social Security and the amendment of the Constitution to include income tax. These things become a foundation of our government, and it seems to me that there's no end to the progression of socialism when you got a guy like that who believes in the founding principles and can't discuss those things.
Well, yeah, he was a socialist pig. No, Rome was not built in a day. And by the way, these problems have taken more than a century to overcome us. The ideas behind them really grew up. They were actually present in the pro-slavery movement in the antebellum America, and they sort of, if you read William Graham Sumner, an academic, people like that, that's from the late 19th century. And Woodrow Wilson and all those people who went to study in Germany, that's from the early 19th century. So it took a long time for us to get in this mess. And my own view is, by the way, is that you'd be pretty moderate about what you would do. What you would try to do is sustain a scholarship of freedom and a politics of freedom, and you would justify what you do step by step and over time in the name of the Constitution. And that means you wouldn't necessarily do anything about Social Security except put it on a paying basis and leave it. I used to be very impatient with Reagan myself. My friend Bill Rusher, who used to work for me from National Review, I used to complain about Reagan to him all the time. Of course, he knew Reagan very well. I knew him pretty well, but he knew him well. And he'd say, "My boy, you're going to think back on this as a golden age." Wise words. But one of my complaints used to be that they do Social Security and we do IRAs. IRAs look very consequential now. And if there was a shift in what you depend on for your retirement from this public thing to this private thing, if George Bush had done the adjustments that he had in mind in the Ownership Society initiative, which I very much favored, cannot imagine how he kind of abandoned it so quickly. But you see, you wouldn't have to do the Constitution. By the way, its liberal friends are correct about something. There's latitude in it, and it was meant to make a powerful government. Madison and Hamilton had an agreement about that. You have to have a more powerful government than we had before to protect our rights. And so that means that if you were speaking in the name of the Constitution and meaning it, then what you did in any given year might be less than the whole, always justified by steps back in the direction of the whole. And if I fault Reagan myself, it's not that he didn't do enough. He did a lot, given that he was at war and had to broker with enemies to get money for the defense budget. My real criticism was he could have been even more. His first inaugural address, which everybody should go and read, it's really great and easy to find on the internet, that should have been his way all the time. And it mostly was. And I think, that is, by the way, partly the function of an institution of learning, which, of course, can't really start with anything narrowly political. It has to begin with an account of what you are. What's the difference between you and an angel? Madison said that the Constitution was written in light of that distinction. What is that distinction? Not easy to state. First time you're asked, I can tell you, because I get to ask people for the first time all the time. It's a delicious enterprise. But so you start with an academic institution or a few, and then you start with a political party, some political party. I don't know if it's one that exists today or some other one. But they become the repositories of a certain kind of understanding, and they're working their way back. And by the way, I know a lot about the Constitution. I learn something about it every day. And I'm wrong sometimes. And, sometimes my friends are wrong. We correct each other. So, as I say, you don't have to think about this progressively. Dismiss that idea. Now think the way older thought worked. Everything is defined by its end, and whatever its end is, it will become increasingly like that over time. And changing the ends of American politics begins with an understanding and an argument. Like the way to deal with that capital thing, that abomination underground, is to make an issue of it, get control of the Congress, and have a public reopening with it changed. And scorn the idiots who put those falsehoods in there and misunderstandings, right? There's an opportunity in that. So that's what I think. I think it's not a progress. Things are not like that. They go in the direction where people's hearts and beliefs and purposes are. And you can't change all of those in a mass. You can change them one by one, 10 by 10. And so that's the big work, right? And I will tell you, by the way, the situation is not that bad. Because, first of all, look at this election. It was close. And the situation was miserable. And there wasn't really anybody really good running. So I don't think we're lost. But I do think that. I don't. And see, if you look at, it looks like a ratchet, right? A ratchet is a mechanistic device. We're talking about human beings and human societies. And if, by the way, you yourself, we ourselves is the way I should put it, fall prey to this thought, that determinism, that we are determined by material causes about us, our freedom is gone in our own hearts. Yes, sir.
Dr. Arnn, it's very difficult to talk about human nature in Washington, D.C., especially if you live here. Do you have any advice, or maybe is there an indirect approach?
Move. No, you see, I don't know about that, Dave. I think it probably isn't, because what I really think, first of all, I have the honor never to have lived in this city. I did run for office one time. If I'd been elected, I would have, but that was a stupid enterprise. I guess what I think is my impression of the city, formed of 30 years. Yeah, those two guys who can't bother. A couple of my precinct workers down there. One of them now a senior man in Heritage, and one of them a senior man on my faculty. We were all, yeah. That's awful. Funny I brought that up. My impression of the city is not like what you say. What I think is people who gravitate here are, especially in the political side, not the lobbying side necessarily, although a lot of that too, are mostly high-minded people. And they want to serve, especially the young who come here. So my own impression from coming here a lot is that that's not so true. And of course, I have a distorted view because I work where I work, and we have a really weird set of institutions, so you can't really come until you agree that you want to do what we want to do. And that I believe is essential to the proper functioning of a college, which means partnership, that word. But, my own impressions of this city are people want to know. And by the way, we're staking something on that. I mean, we are pretty building across the street and all that stuff. That's cool to have, and we can train our interns in there. And if we don't do anything else than that, we will have done something good. But if I'm right, because what I'm thinking, and maybe it's crazy, is that people will get up early in the morning and come and read a good book. And it'll be good for them if they do that. And I think that they should, the best of them, and many of them, must come and read the book for the sake of knowing what's in the book. And not finding out how they should deal with cap and trade next week. That's important, but to really put the argument together against cap and trade, here's the deal. Here's where that goes, it seems to me. Serious academic people, whether they're bribed to do it or not, say out loud that there's a terrible crisis coming, and serious academic people say that there is not. And that gives rise to the argument that we should put a cap on production in the United States of America and shift ourselves distinctly toward a command economy. Now, there's two ways to judge that. And one way is scientifically, which places the decision in the hands of experts who are, by the way, funded by people in politics. Or politically. And that is to say, when you make a judgment about a thing like that, you remember the purposes of the human being and the purposes of the regime, and you don't surrender yourself to such arguments lightly. You see? And that, but political decisions always turn, anytime they're serious, upon a deliberation about human ends. Winston Churchill led the British people to a much more disastrous expenditure against Adolf Hitler. How did he justify it? But you must consider the rule of the Nazi regime and the life that it implies. You'll never settle that argument till you learn what a human being is. And you'll never settle it technically. Because, by the way, even the experts themselves are corrupted. Because they are not experts about ends. Yes, sir. We'll take one more, probably, and we'll go.
Professor Arnn, I'm wondering if we could be better students by maybe taking a harder look at the arguments of the Anti-Federalists. In retrospect, some of their objections may have been quite on spot. At one point, they even complained about having a 6-year term for U.S. senators. The Articles of Confederation makes mention of term limits, and yet today we have people sitting in the same chair for 30 and 40 years at a time. And I'm just thinking in retrospect, maybe we need the Anti-Federalist again today.
Well, I'll say three things about that. The first is no proper understanding of the Constitution can be reached without reading them. And look at our Constitution reader and look at our American history reader at Hillsdale, and you'll find them in there. The second is, evil and wicked though the Constitution is, it is the best thing of its kind ever written by a lot. By a very great lot. And the third thing is, if we cut ourselves off this is a prudential judgment, and it's the one I make, if we cut ourselves off from that thing, which has won the loyalty of the American people for 200 years, and put ourselves in the posture that it was a mistake to begin with, then we cast ourselves into a void. And think of the intellectual climate today. What will we do today if we start over? And so my radical preference is not to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. That was great. Well, our first event, our first principles on First Friday. Thank you all for coming. I want to draw your attention to next month, on Friday, January 9th. We're going to be at the Metropolitan Club, the corner of 17th and H, another old-fashioned place in Washington where you have to wear a tie and a coat and a skirt or, I guess not blue jeans. But we welcome you all there on Friday, January 9th to hear Burton Folsom and Stephen Moore talk about do we need another New Deal. So we'll see you after the holidays. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.